Hi, welcome or welcome back. My name is Eleanor. I just finished the book Perfection by Vincenzo Latronico, and I thought I would quickly come here to record some of my ideas. Now, I should say they're not necessarily ideas about the book, and this is not even a review per se. It's just that it's brought up some ideas, some more general ideas I have, some thoughts that I thought might be of interest to record before I forget them. So first of all, yes, it's gotten a lot of coverage because it was longlisted for the International Booker this year. I should mention it's translated from the Italian, translated by Sophie Hughes. It's a very short book, and these past few days, I just wanted to read something, to complete something that was short and would start me thinking in different ways, just something different. And this did just that. The first idea that I am mulling over is, how did the marketing team, how did Perfection end up on my e-reader? And I would say, beyond the shadow of a doubt, it's because of a little blurb that was written by Sheila Heti, and which I found on some site that was advertising the book. Now, up until this point, I've been really put off by what other writers, by what authors will write as a little blurb recommending a book. Because I always feel that it's sort of a tit for tat. I'll recommend your book if you recommend mine, or it's also like doing someone a favor, like maybe the publishing company, you're doing them a favor. And it never really adds anything. And then comes Sheila Heti, who, I'm a Heti fan to begin with. And she wrote just, I think, is it one sentence or a couple of sentences? I'll read them for you. This is what sold me on the book. Perfection gave me the gift of being able to hold a long span of time in a relationship in a city, and the experience of being young and the experience of being not so young, all in my head at once. I could hold it there the way you hold a parable or a fable, but with all these tiny details too. It also functioned like a kind of murder mystery. What killed the magic? Was it their values? Was it aging? Was it? It's such a beautiful, thoughtful, impeccably crafted book. I had to buy the book after that because, I love a good mystery, but also this idea that if you have someone who's a very creative thinker, who thinks outside the box, and they read a book that is doing something that they see as doing something different, and they connect with it, that is a great selling point for me. And that usually happens with books that are odd, that are weird, and also that are polarizing. So, and when I say polarizing, I'm not referring to books that are controversial, maybe politically or something like that. I mean polarizing in the sense of you could get a review that is absolutely scathing of it, and another that glorifies it. And I, as the particular reader I am at the moment, agree with both reviews. And this brought me back also to the book I read prior to Perfection, which was another one-word title book, Audition. And it occurred to me that reading Audition and then Perfection is rather interesting and a good combination. It's a good combination. If I were buying a present for myself and I hadn't read these two books, I would get those two books. They're both short. They both have this mystery about them, but primarily they're weird, strange, difficult, mysterious books. And it's very easy to dismiss them because you see, they don't fit into a genre. And what I mean by that, this is another thing I've been thinking about, apart from the, marketing of books, is how I'm laughing because when I say out loud what I've been thinking, I realize that it's somewhat strange. But in any case, what I've been thinking about is, I wish in a way that I had the personality that could really embrace genre books. I wish that I loved historical fiction, or I wish I loved romance, or really loved mysteries or thrillers or something like that. Science fiction, I don't know. Problem is I don't. Problem is that I like books that are written in a strange way and don't fit in any category per se. And I think this is also the reason why I sometimes can change my mind so radically. Because with these sort of books, it's quite easy to, from one person, you put on your literary glasses and you're able to see that there's so much in this text that's so fascinating and so different, so unusual. And then you wake up the next morning, you put on these other glasses, the glasses that you use in the world, when you go to work, when you go on the bus, when you're having a coffee with friends, when you're chatting with your family. And you suddenly think that was the most pretentious piece of silliness. And what did I ever see in it? Now, I think you have to be very strong to continue to read these sorts of books, because it means that you have to hold within yourself two views at the same time. And so coming back to perfection, I would say that, first of all, I don't even see it as a novel, really. And that reminds me, well, I suppose it reminds me of Audition. I don't really see it as a novel. It is very short, and it's not that it's a novella. It's not nonfiction, but it's not necessarily fiction, and it's written in an odd way. And of course, I can say the same for Sheila Heti's books. And Pure Color came to mind immediately as well. Now, why did Pure Color and Sheila Heti's Pure Color come to mind? Because the most powerful sense I had of this dichotomy between loving a crazy book and at the same time knowing that it's ridiculous and doesn't fit any genre and doesn't really make sense and doesn't even read like a proper novel, is Pure Color. And I read a review of Pure Color, and this was a while ago. Was it a couple of years ago? Anyway, I discussed it in one of my videos, I'm sure. And I really enjoyed Pure Color, but I didn't know, what it was really. And I still don't, and I still go back and enjoy reading bits of it. But I read a review that said, look, this is just, it doesn't follow any of the rules of novel writing. It does not follow the rules. And there's no clarity. And I agree, there's no clarity and it doesn't follow the rules, but I like it. Damn, I like it. So, coming back to, the way Sheila Heti framed the book Perfection for me before I even read it, I start reading it and I think, oh gosh, this was not, I felt, what I felt like when I started reading, I think I read maybe the first 50 pages, and it's a short book of Perfection. And I thought to myself, they got me. It's that same feeling I get when I buy something off Instagram, thinking that it's a local person who's making, hair accessories. And then I realized, no, I got had. It's some Chinese company that's making crap, and the the hair accessories aren't going to work, and I've wasted my money, and there's no way I'm going to get it back. I kind of felt gypped. Now, if not for Sheila Heti, I would have put it down, and I would have said that here because that's how I felt. I didn't even want to finish it, but I continued, and I realized my expectations. Heti had set me up with such not high expectations, expectations of a certain kind that were not obviously met by the book. There's not very much plot. There's almost no character development. So it's a young couple. They're millennials, although it's not clear from the beginning. And I'll come back to that as well, because there's all this whole thing about the generations of the 21st century. So this young couple, millennials, they grow up just as the internet is being introduced. So they grow up with the internet, really. And if it's not obvious, I am what's known as a Gen X. So it took me a moment to realize that, we're not talking about the present time, which is, I suppose, I see it as more time for Gen Y. It's millennials, but anyway, am I making any sense? So it's a man and a woman. They moved to Germany. They moved to Berlin because they're looking for something. They're looking to perfect their life in some way. They both work online in some sort of, being from Gen X, I never really know what any of you are doing, millennials and Gen Y. It's like, what is it that you're doing on the computer? But they're doing it. They're doing it very stylishly, and style is very important, and aesthetics is very important. And I love this stuff. I mean, I grew up without computers at all, really, until, definitely in high school. Computers were almost non-existent. Computers were odd. And so they live a life that they have dreamt of, that they don't need to go to the office. They can both work from home. The home is set up to look like some sort of glorious, glossy magazine. And they find that the meaning is lacking in their lives, and they get restless. And it continues. I mean, no spoilers here. I mean, you should read the book to see what happens to them. But it's clear, I mean, suffice to say from Sheila Heti's, words, what killed the magic is the mystery of it. But it's not about, this is not a book about relationships, and it doesn't delve deep. And it has a narrator who's at a distance from everything that's happening, but it's not fully judgmental at all. It's as if you're reading, it feels as if you're maybe watching a documentary about a certain generation. And that's what it is. You basically become a fly on the wall watching them, but not knowing anything about the deeper thoughts, emotions that this couple has. Only about their yearning for perfection. And so was that worth the $10 I spent on getting this ebook? And that's half the price of the usual ebooks I buy. Yeah, it really was. And would I recommend this book? Yes, I would. I would recommend it to everyone, because I want to hear what other people think, because I believe that this book is open to a lot of different interpretations depending on what sort of life you have, and more importantly, your age. So and I had to look up what are the age brackets for Gen X, millennials, Gen Y, etc. So someone like Sheila Heti probably feels much closer to that generation and to this book than I do. So when she writes What Killed the Magic, I think that she may well have experienced some of what she calls magic. For me, I have been more of a spectator to that generation. And so I come to the book more as a spectator. And I appreciate very much not being forced to read the usual cliches of how the internet lifestyle is so empty. Every generation is looking for that elusive perfection. Every generation has their own aesthetic sense. Every generation is attached to objects. And the author, Latronico, mentions in an interview that he based this book on a book that was written in 1965 by George Perec called Things, A Story of the 60s, which describes an aspirational French couple and the way advertising takes a hold of them. And again, as a spectator, I'm not saying I'm above it all. I'm definitely not. What I am is I greatly appreciate this idea that you can try to make your life as beautiful as you can, and that of course also has something to do with trends. And the idea that you're going to make your home, you're going to romanticize your life. That's the phrase, romanticize your life. And for a long time, I still watch a lot of these videos. Before I discovered BookTube, I watched a lot of these, Get Ready With Me, The Life of a Single Person in New York, where they really, it's a lot of work to make your life seem so beautiful. And I really, really appreciate it. And so I also appreciated the fact that in perfection, you weren't taken to an extreme view. You were allowed to see how empty and silly really a lot of it is. But at the same time, it made me realize what I've realized all along, that when you're watching a 25-year-old romanticize their life for a living on screen, it's really not that different from a 50s housewife, for example, who would use objects and social structures so as to try to make a difficult life, because life is tough. Life is tough, whoever you are. I don't care what you say. Whoever you are, life is tough. And if it's, if it's getting the curtains to match the sofa, if it's makeup, or if it's actually filming yourself every week, waking up in this beautiful bed with the sheets and opening this, and living in this beautiful sort of box in the sky, and I don't know, in Manhattan or Paris or something like that. There's something rather lovely about it, but at the same time, terribly sad. And, well, that's what happens when you try for perfection. So that's this book. Now, I wanted to go back to, I've really gone off track. I've gone on so many tangents. Okay, going back to this book, because I do have a few other things and I'm looking at my notes. A few interesting facts. Vincenzo Latronico actually has been working for a long time as a translator. And I think that's important because he, and also as an art critic, art writer. And he was saying how, as a translator, he feels, he equates translating to what happens when a guest visits you and the guest leaves their shoes behind and you put the shoes on, which I thought was just great and very much how perfection reads. Also, when he was trained in writing about art, he was told to start with just describing the objects, just describing the object, and then the objects will show you where to go. And this is what he does in perfection as well. So I think that those are two interesting aspects that might help you enjoy the book more. Now, in another interview, he mentioned that he himself led a similar life to this. He's a millennial, and he moved to Berlin from somewhere in Italy, and then moved back. And he said that the community of writers there couldn't read each other's work because of the language barrier. One was, might be British, one was Italian, one was German, but they didn't know each other's language well enough to read their work. What they did was they would sit around, and he says that we talk about Sheila Heti and Rachel Cusk. And they all belong in the same world, which I thought was great. He also said that he has a terrible ear for dialogue, and that made me think of this. When you read something like Perfection, and it doesn't have dialogue, because he knows he can't write dialogue, and it doesn't have, it's not a novel really. It doesn't follow the rules of a good novel. What I think to myself often is, this writer isn't good enough to write a novel, so this is what he has to write. That's unfair, and I don't really believe it, but it does come, I do think it for a time. I wonder if any of you think that too. I think that all the time with Sheila Heti too, especially with Pure Color. Because when I read Pure Color, I thought, oh, poor Heti, she desperately wants to write a novel and she can't. She's not made for it. She's supposed to write in this other way. And I think there is some truth to that. But it's not necessarily negative, because you see, if you can only write the way you write. If you can't write, if you don't have an ear for dialogue, you'll never have an ear for dialogue. And if you can't write a traditionally structured novel, you can try very hard, but probably you won't make it. However, you can still be a great writer. You're just a different writer. And those are the books that I end up loving and reading, like Pure Color, like Perfection. And possibly, I'm not sure if I want to bring Katie Kitamura into exactly that categorization. Yeah, I don't want to bring her in, but I do want to mention that I've been reading, because of my obsession with Audition that I've talked about before, and loving it so much, I wanted to see what other people wrote. And generally, amazing reviews. Everyone loves it. Except, and this is what makes it so interesting, when someone disagrees. I wish people would disagree more. So, what is it? You see, well, this is showing my age again. Look, I've printed out the reviews, because how can I read a review when it's not printed out? I grew up with newspaper. What can I say? So The Guardian, and it was written, I'll add a link, by Anthony Cummins, April 14th. Audition, an evasive experiment. Now, I like the fact that he says he just didn't get it. You hear that a lot with the poetry I like, the weird, mysterious poetry I like, that a lot of people call difficult poetry. I just don't get it. I just don't get it. And I always think, yes, it's so refreshing when someone just says that, because the truth is that if you don't get it, it's not meant for you. And with Audition, I see things in it because of the life experiences I've had that are so crystal clear. I get it to such a degree that it's almost not mysterious. It's exactly. But here you have Anthony Cummins, and he obviously has had completely different life experiences, and he doesn't get it. Now, so he calls it a joylessly evasive experiment. But the most interesting thing, towards the end, he writes this, and and I quote, he says that there are some early passages involving her memories of abortion and miscarriage, a sequence rendered almost offensively pointless, given it's just about the most vivid thing in the book. So what he's saying in this review is that there's so much that he doesn't get in the book. And yet, in some early passages, there's something that he very much understands and is very clearly portrayed. And it is the memories of abortion and miscarriage. Now, if you have a book that you don't get because it seems too obscure, but at the beginning of this book, there's something that's not obscure, I would hope that if you were a reviewer, you would stop and think, why has she done this? Why has the writer done this? Which he doesn't do. And I don't blame him, because he does this for a living. He reviews books for a living. You can't spend a month reading and rereading a book and writing and rewriting. You're making a living. You have to move on. You write your opinion, you move on. And so this actually brought me to this idea of the treasure that BookTube is. It's an absolute treasure, because you can get different people from different walks of life, different genders, different cultures. And if I want to, I can spend a year reading and rethinking a book and talking about it. And this comes back to the kinds of books that I like, which are weird, strange, mysterious. You can't rely on reviewers. You can't rely on reviewers that are professional to discuss these books. It's really up to you. It's these strange books like Heti, Kitamura, Latronico. You can read all the professional reviews you like, but ultimately it's up to you, because they're open texts. It's the closest you get to reading poetry, really. Because, and coming back to poetry, which is my true love, reviewers of poetry a lot of people who talk about poetry are selling you something that's false. And what I mean by that is traditional poetry reviewers. When they talk about poetry, they make you think that there's the good kind of poetry that makes sense, that people get, and then there's the bad kind of poetry that you don't really get. It's the same. It's the same discussion with prose. With fiction. Like this is a novel and this isn't a novel. This is a poem. This isn't a poem. And I think we're very lucky to live in this era, in this time. Whatever generation you are, millennial, X, Y, Z, I don't even know. Because we have an opportunity to kind of make small groups of like-minded people. And there's really no need, for a book like Audition by Heti Kitamura. I think I've read possibly everything that's been written. Her book came out a few days ago. And I can say that I had no need for any of those reviews. They're all redundant. Because I connected with this book in a certain way. And so why would you go and read a review? It's an interesting question. I'm wondering, if you're watching this, do you go and look up a lot of the written reviews online? Or, maybe you subscribe to different newspapers. Do you really pay that much attention to them? Do you pay more attention to booktubers? Or do you really just instinctively know what you like and what you don't like? I like the idea that the professional reviewer is no longer lauded as the maker or breaker of books. Okay, so that's it. I will see you next time. I hope you've been well, and don't forget, the only real property is the property of the mind. Bye.